What is the scope of the ISMS? One of the most consequential decisions in any ISO 27001 implementation is deciding what the ISMS covers. Too narrow and you leave material security risks unmanaged, fail to satisfy customer and regulatory requirements, and undermine the assurance value of certification. Too broad and you create an unmanageable implementation that strains resources and produces an ISMS that operates poorly. ISO 27001 Clause 4.3 requires a documented scope statement that defines the boundaries of the ISMS. Let us explore what scope means, how to determine it, and what the risks of getting it wrong look like. Let us start with what the ISMS scope actually defines, the boundaries and applicability of the management system. The ISMS scope defines which parts of the organization, which locations, processes, systems, and people fall under the protection of the management system. The location and organizational unit dimension of scope is often the first scoping decision organizations make. A multinational organization might scope the ISMS to its headquarters and primary data centers, excluding regional offices that have limited interaction with sensitive information systems. A professional services firm might scope the ISMS to the team that delivers client engagements, excluding back-office functions. These are legitimate scope choices, but they require careful analysis to ensure that excluded locations do not handle material quantities of sensitive information or create security dependencies that could affect the in-scope environment. Process scope defines which of the organization's activities are governed by the ISMS. For a software development company, the development, deployment, and support processes are likely to be in scope. For a financial services firm, the customer account management, transaction processing, and reporting processes are core scope candidates. Defining process scope requires understanding which processes create, store, transmit, or destroy sensitive information, because it is those processes where information security risks materialize and controls must be applied. Systems and technology scope defines which information assets are protected under the ISMS. This includes servers, endpoints, applications, databases, network infrastructure, cloud services, and any other technology that stores or processes in-scope information. The asset inventory that supports the risk assessment depends directly on the technology scope definition. Organizations with complex, heterogeneous technology environments often find that defining technology scope is the most technically demanding aspect of the scoping exercise. Whenever the ISMS scope does not cover the entire organization, interfaces between what is inside and outside the scope become significant security concerns. An in-scope data processing system that receives inputs from an out-of-scope business unit creates an interface that could introduce untreated risks. An in-scope cloud environment that is managed by an out-of-scope IT operations team creates a governance interface that needs careful management. ISO 27001 requires these interfaces to be identified and documented so that the risks they create can be assessed and addressed. The scope statement is a mandatory documented output of Clause 4.3. It should be written with enough precision that anyone reading it, including an auditor who has not previously encountered the organization, can understand exactly what the ISMS covers. Vague scope statements that refer to the organization's information security activities without specifying which locations, processes, and systems are included fail to satisfy the standards requirements and make the audit process unnecessarily difficult. Now let us look at how organizations should approach the scope determination process and the common scoping patterns that emerge in practice. Scope determination is an analytical process that draws on context, interested party requirements, and practical implementation capacity. The context analysis conducted under Clause 4.1 is the primary analytical input to scope determination. Understanding the organization's information assets, its operating environment, the threats it faces, and its internal capabilities helps identify which parts of the organization are most exposed to information security risks and therefore most clearly need to be within scope. An organization that processes large volumes of personal data has an obvious scope driver toward the systems and processes that handle that data. An organization that relies on intellectual property as a competitive asset has a clear scope driver toward the systems that create and store that property. Interested party requirements, identified under Clause 4.2, often impose mandatory scope constraints that override purely internal scope judgments. A customer contract that requires ISO 27001 certification of the service delivery environment means that the service delivery environment must be in scope. The organization cannot choose to exclude it for implementation convenience. A regulatory requirement that applies to a specific business unit means that unit must be addressed in the ISMS, either by including it in scope or by demonstrating that the regulatory requirement is met through other means. A common scoping decision is whether to scope the ISMS to the whole organization or to a specific department, division, service line, or geographic site. Whole organization scope provides the broadest assurance and is increasingly expected by customers and regulators, but it requires committing the entire organization to ISO 27001 requirements. Departmental or service-specific scope allows organizations to achieve certification faster and with fewer resources, but it limits the assurance value of the certificate and may not satisfy customer requirements that cover the full scope of the relationship. Scope that is too narrow creates genuine security risks. If critical information assets, systems, or processes are excluded from the ISMS, they will not be subject to the risk assessment, they will not benefit from the controls implemented under the ISMS, and they will not be covered by the monitoring, incident management, and improvement processes that keep the ISMS effective. Auditors will scrutinize narrow scope definitions carefully, looking for evidence that exclusions are genuinely justified rather than motivated by a desire to limit the implementation effort. Scope that is too broad creates different but equally serious problems. An ISMS that covers the entire organization, including functions with low information security risk, locations with minimal information assets, and processes where security controls add little value, becomes difficult to manage effectively. The risk assessment becomes unwieldy, the control implementation becomes resource-intensive, and the ongoing maintenance of the ISMS becomes burdensome. Proportionality is essential. The scope should be large enough to address material security risks and satisfy stakeholder requirements, and no larger. Let us bring together the essential points about ISMS scope. If you want to define the right ISMS scope and build an ISO 27001 management system that genuinely protects your organization, our complete Udemy course provides the step-by-step guidance, templates, and examples you need. Enroll today. Thank you for watching. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. See you in the next video.